I got a lot of interesting comments that came in on a recent video I did on the housing correction that we're seeing here in Canada. Some people agreed with it, some disagreed, some flat out challenged the idea that we're even seeing a housing downturn at all. So I wanted to follow up with this, and I wanted to do something very simple. I just want to separate the data from the anecdotes and address the most common objections that I saw. I don't want to try and win an argument here. That's not the point. I just want to make sure that Canadians have a clear picture of what's actually happening across our country and to expand our focus beyond just your own street, your own city, or whatever bubble we all happen to be living in. So let me start with this concept. There is no crash. Prices are still high. A few comments. KS3634 says, what crash? Prices are still through the roof. The roof. Griffin3 says, LOL, my house went down in value and now it's going up again. So this guy is full of crap. I've watched the housing market and sales are going up. Brian Barber adds in, crazy talk, check Calgary area prices. Acer Nitro says, I'm not going to read the whole comment here, but part of it, I monitor the whole Canadian real estate market for quite some time now, and I can confirm there is no crash, no fire sale, nothing. There's nothing to see here. So after I've digested those comments, there is an important distinction that some people seem to be missing here. A market can be expensive and we can be in a downturn at the same time. Think of it like stocks. If I take Palantir as my example, if it falls 20% tomorrow, it could still be expensive, right? These two things are not contradictions. If we look nationally, Canadian home prices peaked early 2022. They're still down around 20% or closer to 30% after you adjust for inflation. And that is the definition of a multi-year correction. Does that mean that every single city fell? No. Does it mean that prices are cheap? Absolutely not there. But when you look at the national market, not these individual anecdotes, it is a clear trajectory that you're seeing. Also, and this matters, we are seeing a slowing in sales. We're seeing longer listing times, larger price cuts, and these are classic correction indicators. So no, markets do not need to have fire sales or a bunch of foreclosures like we saw back in 2008 to be in a correction. Now, the second theory here is stop comparing to 2022. That was a blip. When talking about housing, you have to compare 2025 to 2020. Stop comparing to 2021 and 2022. That was a blip. Houses in 2025 are worth more than they were in 2020, full stop. Corolla says, saying that the prices are down 20% is misleading. They are 20% down from 2022 when people were buying houses like they were mad for insane prices. Well, those prices are not coming back, so get used to it. And we're still not at pre-pandemic house prices. Okay, two interesting comments. First off, this is exactly what economists do to compare the peaks. Peaks tell you when that cycle has turned. Think about this. If home prices rose for 20 years, they peak, then they fall for 3 straight years, you have to measure that decline from the peak. That is where the correction started, right? It's the same in stock market analysis, commodities, interest rate cycles, everything. So when you compare 2025 prices to 2020, you're masking the actual downturn. That's kind of like saying my stock is still above what I paid, so the bear market doesn't really count. When we look at the national numbers today, they show a 3-year decline. And that's the point, not whether prices are still higher from some arbitrary point at some point in the past. A lot of talk about Montreal in these comments. Iphone4, I'm not sure how you say that with a French accent, but this person says, I understand that taken together, Vancouver and Toronto represent a substantial portion of the Canadian real estate market. However, the situation might be different in other parts of the country, like Montreal, for instance, where home prices continue to grow at a remarkable pace, despite construction of many new buildings, mostly for apartment renting. Cupcake says, well, in my city of Montreal, all of the house prices are selling quickly and at high prices. And CCGG says, no housing bubble bursting in Montreal, Quebec. Prices continue to increase and sales are still very high, no dip. I'll say right up front that those are some very valid comments. Real estate corrections are never uniform across an entire country. If we look at Canada today, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, these are 3 of the stronger markets. Ontario, British Columbia definitely account for the majority of the decline, but there's a reason for that. Corrections tend to hit the markets that have risen the most and the fastest, and they tend to hit markets where leverage is the highest. But that doesn't invalidate the national trend. It means exactly what the video said. The correction is real, but it's uneven and it's easy to ignore unless you follow the countrywide data. That's why I called it a quiet correction. So yes, Montreal may still be rising, but that is just one data point out of many. It's not evidence against a national downturn. Now, people have been calling a bubble forever. Rice Chandler 9753 says, everyone's talking nothing but. Tim W says they have been talking about a bubble since 2008. And Elvis is alive says, quiet crash? LOL, everyone knows what's going on. Don't need your shocking truth. Well, my response to those comments is that if everybody already knew, I don't think we would be seeing the level of denial and the disagreement in this one video in the comments that I'm showing you today. A few key points. First of all, people predict crashes all the time. And if Tim is right with his comment, that is 17 years of being wrong. So something is wrong with that model. Most people also measure the market only by their own neighborhood. That's why we get comments like, my house is up, so there's no downturn. That is not an analysis. That's anecdotal. Also, awareness is not the same as acceptance. Saying that people talked about it is dramatically different from actually emotionally accepting that a multi-year decline is happening in what is probably your largest asset. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution. You can talk about your diet for years and years and years, but actually going on it is something entirely different. Lastly, on this point, this data that we looked at is not based on your feeling or your emotions. These national price indexes, the inflation adjustments, the sales volumes, those aren't my opinions. They're actual data points that we can look at and that we can assess. It is true that a downturn can be widely discussed and also disbelieved at the same time. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Again, check the comments of my previous video. I was surprised a bit by a comment from one viewer. Hamilton Informant says, Canadians are not interested in home ownership, period. Know your market snapshot. 3 generations of Canadians have lived comfortable and affordable in rental. Home ownership is a past fate. I'll just simply say to that, if Canadians truly were not interested in owning, there wouldn't be these bidding wars we see all the time, especially through the pandemic. We wouldn't see record household debt right now. We also wouldn't see surveys showing that half of homeowners plan to use their home to fund retirement. Renting certainly can be a good choice, but the comment that Canadians aren't interested in ownership does not match the available data or certainly the behavior of the market. Now, lastly, I couldn't end the video without acknowledging the Timbo 911. He says, oh great, another guy who bought a camera and a microphone telling people he's the only one talking about a housing bubble. It's been talked about numerous times. Man, these people really think highly of themselves. I call it the microphone illness. Buy a microphone and think the world wants to hear me speak. Brutal. I guess I could go down a rabbit hole and dignify the personal attacks, but I'm not going to do that. But I can address the underlying sentiment here. At least I hope I can. First off, I didn't buy a microphone and think that the world wants to hear me speak. This channel, which my son started way back in 2017. It'll be 8 years old in a few weeks on December the 18th. We built this channel to help Canadians understand the markets using data, not because we think we know everything, because what we do know is that we certainly don't know everything. We're not just a blah, 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 like Timbo is suggesting. Our goal here is to add some clarity, to share some thoughts, and to try and help our fellow Canadians manage their personal financial affairs as best they can. That goes right back to the very first video that Brandon posted all those years ago. Now, I don't watch a ton of YouTube videos in the space that we covered. So if someone else covered this topic before, that is great. That is how information gets out there. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not the first one to talk about what's happening in the Canadian housing market right now. But I certainly wasn't jumping on any bandwagon. I haven't watched even one video that talks about what's going on in Canadian housing these days, so I thought I would add to the conversation. So just let me say, the point of the original video isn't that Canada is crashing everywhere. It was to point out that we are legitimately living through a correction that most people don't even feel, at least not yet. The fact that we have uneven markets, that doesn't change the national trend. Again, strong pockets don't actually erase the broader declines. Individual experiences don't override countrywide data. If anything, as I said, the comments we've looked at here prove the point that most people judge housing by what they see from their own front porch and not by what's happening across the country. And I hope at least that's exactly what I said. And that's why I said that it feels quiet. While we were on the topic of housing, episode 8 of my second act retirement series addresses the housing challenges that we have in retirement. I did buy a microphone for that, and you can hear my thoughts on the issue by clicking on the thumbnail. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.